So I'm Kristine Koslung, and together with Haje, we will take you through this session. I'm also the host for the OIV studios this year, and I usually work as a business developer in cellular innovation and primarily with space startups. So for 2 years now, I have been managing an incubation program initiated by the European Space Agency. And I also work as an ambassador for a program in ESA called Business Application, which makes it possible for us to work with both startups, SMEs, and corporates. And that is kind of why I think that this session today is valuable, because many of the partners that we have during Oslo Innovation Week work with international partners. And I'm not sure if you can say the new normal. I'm not really fan of that statement, but maybe it is. When people are working from home and we're having all of these video sessions and meetings through our computers, it would be interesting to get some tips and tricks on how to get the most value out of those meetings and how to host online events. And that's why we're having you, Haje, together with us today.
Ta-da!
Because for the OIV studios, at least, we are using the online platform Kamps. And you're the founder of Kamps.
I sure am. So I have had a wonderfully weird career of doing a bunch of startups mostly. I think this is my 5th or 6th startup. And I've also kind of dipped my toe into lots of other sides of the startup ecosystem. I've been a venture capitalist here in California. I live in Oakland. I have been on the journalist side. I was at TechCrunch for a couple of years. In fact, about 2 years ago, I was part of the Oslo Innovation Week as a judge for one of the competitions as kind of a representative of TechCrunch. So it's kind of, this has come full circle. And these days, I am the CEO of Kamps, the very platform we're using right now.
So, but I know you've also lived in Norway for a few years.
I did,
you grew up in Norway, didn't you?
Yeah, I lived in Norway from when I was 7 till I was 19 or so, I think. So I
still speak Norwegian?
I do still dabble in Norwegian.
So if anyone in the audience have any questions they want to ask you in Norwegian, you can answer them.
I feel brave. I can probably still deal with that.
So yeah, by the way, if anyone has any questions, please just write them in the chat box below, and we will try to answer them throughout the event. And I think it would be pretty cool if you also wrote a sentence or two about the event that you're hosting, and maybe just a few words about the company that you represent. So it might be easier for the two of us to try to answer the questions.
Yeah. One quirk about the platform as well. If you want to see Kristine or myself bigger than the other person, so whoever's talking, you can click on our video, and that makes the video bigger. So it makes it a little bit easier to get a connection with the people who you want to connect with.
Yeah, good. Okay, I think I just want to start and ask you, what are the most common mistakes that people do when holding online events?
I think there's a few, actually. I think one of them is, I think the main challenge I see people have is to not dare and do the event in the first place, where people think that things have to be absolutely perfect. And they're like, okay, well, I can't get to perfection, so I can't do it at all. The truth is, especially in a world where COVID is happening and there's a bunch of things that are unusual, right? A lot of us are working from home. A lot of us have, imperfect internet connections, that kind of thing. My sense is that it's better to do something than to not do something. And so, if it ends up that you end up doing a video conference from your kitchen, who cares, right? It's fine. And right, exactly. And it doesn't. So I think actually, there's a saying that is that perfect is the enemy of good. And I think that's true. I think a lot of people can make really good events happen with, with a little bit of planning, with a little bit of background, and make it really, really good. I like to say that people are willing to suffer bad quality for good content. but not the other way around. If you have a super slick production, but the content is garbage because your speakers don't know what they're talking about, or it's just not engaging, then people are going to leave. It doesn't matter that it looks beautiful and that all the graphics are fantastic. So I think it's more about think about your audience, think about what you want to say, and then build a really good event around that.
But there are certain things that changes up when you're having an online event compared to when you're on stage, for example.
Yeah.
Like, how can you keep the audience engaged for more than 5 minutes? That's challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes a little bit down to thinking about the context where people are when they are consuming your content, right? Especially now, people are probably at home. And so you're kind of competing against some really big, scary competitors in terms of attention, right? It might be very tempted to go and watch Netflix because Netflix is interesting and has really good production, and you can giggle and you can kind of forget about the world. These conferences are a much more engaging medium because you're there, it's real time, it's, there's a whole bunch of stuff that makes that possible. But the flip side is also that you do get to interact in real time. Kristine already asked, please ask us questions. So yeah, please ask us questions. And that kind of stuff makes it possible to make something that is worth watching in real time. I mean, we're also recording this, so you can probably watch this later at your leisure whenever you want. But there needs to be a reason for why people dial in, watch it live, communicate with the other people who are present, etc., to make it really worthwhile. And I think that's where you have to think about the difference between real life and virtual. In real life, if you get on a plane, you travel 3,000 miles, you're at this horrible conference center with terrible coffee. I have great coffee. It came from my kitchen. If you're in this terrible conference center, then, you have to kind of be okay with being there. And by virtue of that, you're kind of surrounded and immersed in the experience. When you're at home, over there is the window with my email. Over there is the window with my Slack. It's very easy to kind of lose focus, and then the voice kind of fades out in the background and it just disappears. So to have a really good session, you have to kind of keep that in mind. Both, when you're scheduling your event, plan in some breaks so people can go to their email or Twitter or whatever they want to do, but also to make it interactive enough that it's worth staying, that people feel real value from being present.
But is there like a golden rule for how long an event should be online?
I don't know, to be honest. On Kamps, we've seen events that have ran for just an hour. I mean, like this one, right? Right now, I can see there's 23 people here. I hope that these 23 people get a bunch of value out of being here, right? And so for those people, this is the right place to be right now because you're learning about what it is, and it's only 45 minutes long. We've also seen multi-day events like Oslo Innovation Week later in the week, where there's a lot more time. I think the rule of thumb is it needs to be the right amount of time for the content you're trying to deliver. I think in general, I would say shorter is better because people have the opportunity to kind of have the context for being there and have the attention span. But the other thing is you could also make it thematic, right? So you have 2 hours on one theme, 2 hours on another theme, 2 hours on another theme. So when people are thinking about attending this event, if you happen to be at a conference center, you're not going to leave for a morning and then come back in the afternoon. But here you have that opportunity. So actually all the interesting stuff is between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. That means that up to 3 p.m. I can do my normal work and then I can go and enjoy the event for 2 hours in the afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. But we also had several events, several webinars in April and May before summer, pretty much directly after Norway closed and shut down.
Yep.
And for the first event, we saw that there was several people that wanted to attend and they stayed during the entire event. And then after a few weeks, it just kind of seemed like people got tired of being on webinars because there was so many team meetings, there was so many Zoom meetings all the time. They kind of just, it's not interesting anymore.
Yeah.
Is that trend kind of switching a bit now? Is it turning?
I think in the beginning, people started doing everything because it was new, right? When something is new, you have a higher level of tolerance for for figuring out how it works. And I think what we're seeing now is that people are finding a little bit of a balance. You're finding like, okay, I don't want to spend 9 hours on Zoom, but 10 minutes isn't enough either because I don't get everything done that I want. And so it kind of normalizes to a level that people are comfortable with. You know, it is actually painful to sit in an office chair for 9 hours and stare at exactly 1 meter distance and just be focused. And what I'm finding also is that it can actually be really hard to interact with people in non-3D. The times that I'm meeting my friends in real life now, I'm like, you have a whole extra dimension. It feels so good to be able to kind of see you in real time. And this is so high def. But I feel like there is a lovely middle ground where you're able to build something that is evocative and interesting and engaging, and that has like an amount of time that people are willing to spend for that event. Yeah.
I think you have to move on. Let's talk about the equipment that one should invest in. Do you have any tips? What is needed? What can you use? How much money should you spend?
So I think it's helpful if I say a little bit about my background. I was a TV producer for a few years, and I'm a very avid amateur photographer. I've written 15 books about photography. And so I'm very gear focused in general. But the thing that I always tell my students is that there's actually not that much you need to get really, really good video. The most important part, there's two important parts, good light and good audio. Now, good light is actually pretty straightforward to do. Make sure you don't have light coming from behind you, because then the front of your face gets dark and it's very hard to see you. And the other piece is to just think about how the light is balanced. Now, I've actually spent quite a lot of time designing the light in this exact video because I spend a lot of time in virtual conferences. I do a lot of speaking and that kind of stuff. So I've kind of got it designed like this. So behind me, I've got a couple of blue lights. They're dirt cheap. They're just cheap LED lights that I plug in and point at my walls. And then up here, I have like a bigger light that is facing me. This is a professional video light that's very expensive, but actually any light that is just has a big surface, so pointed at a wall so it bounces back at you, that makes for a really nice big soft light, and it makes it really pleasant to watch. If I turn these lights off, it actually, you can see how much of a difference it makes. Hey Google, end video session. I've got it set up to all sorts of fancy stuff. So this is what I look like without my lights on, and it looks like garbage. So it makes a huge difference. Hey Google, start video session. And I've got it set up to smart switches and that kind of stuff to make it all fancy. But yeah, so those lights make an enormous difference. And I do have a very expensive camera up there. This is a Sony A7R3 with a $2,000 lens on it. So it's with the lights and the camera, there's probably about $5,000 worth of equipment there. But you don't need that. You could switch to a relatively inexpensive USB camera. I think if you're a professional speaker or if you speak at conferences a lot, it is worth investing in. Logitech makes some good cameras. There's lots of guides for what's the best webcam out there. Just a good high resolution web camera that has good autofocus and good light controls goes such a long way. So give it enough light so it can do its job, and then it just works. Most laptops have terrible cameras on them. Even Apple, who really should know better, have terrible cameras on their laptops. And it's just because they can save 20 cents when they do that. But of course, as a presenter, you want to look as good as possible. The other piece of the puzzle is having really good audio. So I use these little earbuds just because the sound from these aren't actually that good. But I like to not have big headphones on or have cables running down when I'm presenting. So these help me hear you. And in addition, I have a microphone here. So this is actually a Zoom H1, which is a relatively cheap microphone that's used for field recording. So it has a memory card in it. You can walk around, you can record stuff. So back when I was doing podcasting, I used this to do interviews. I go to somebody's house, I put up a little tripod, put it in front of them, and that's my recording equipment. It works fantastically well. The cool thing is you can also plug it into USB, and you get a professional grade stereo microphone that I have on this boom here, but it's just out of frame. So, you can hear me really well. And just good audio and good lighting, those are 100% my top things. Remember also that if you're on a Zoom meeting and something stalls out, then as long as the audio keeps going, it is tolerable. If the audio cuts out, it is bad. So if you have to choose between really good video or really good audio, I would say opt for audio every day of the week, because that is the thing that people really need in order to really be able to pay attention to what you're saying.
Interesting. I feel a bit embarrassed now because I'm using the Apple camera and only AirPods. No microphone.
We can hear you. So this is the thing, right? We can hear you just fine. So, and you spent a lot less money than me, so maybe you're a lot smarter than I am.
Maybe I am. By the way, again, if anyone in the audience have any questions, please just write them in the chat box. Yeah, we have a question from Martina. I think you actually just answered that one. Would you say that audio quality is more important than video quality? You said yes.
I mean, I think if you have to choose, I would choose audio. I think people are so used to seeing really beautiful visuals on television that, both are important. But again, if you only have a small amount of money to spend and you only want to fix one thing, I would start with audio, because that's the one that really jumps out at people. Like, oh, wow, I can hear you so well.
What about when having workshops, for example, or debates? Should one invest in one of those speakers or one of those microphones they can have in the middle of the room that catches the voices from
so there are some really good directional microphones that can actually, like when one person is speaking, they kind of try and filter out all the other noise. So they have like several. I think Cisco makes a really good one. I think there's a couple of other ones where it's kind of directional. Now that makes a lot of sense when you have multiple speakers in the same room. That is notoriously hard to get good microphones for. And the amount of times when I was in BC, we would hang over the microphone to shout into it because people couldn't hear us. So invest as much money as you possibly can in good audio equipment, especially if there's more than one person in the room. Because ultimately, communication is about being understood and being heard and getting your message across. And audio is the vast majority of that. Even if I turn my video off right now and I continue to talk, you still get something out of it. If I'm just, nobody gets anything out of watching my face move.
True. I also talked with some of the partners that will be hosting events during Oslo Innovation Week earlier this week. And they said something about standing up while presenting, as you would do if you were on the stage. Is that also something that you should do in the virtual world? Should you stand up during the online events like this? Is it more engaging?
So I have a couple of mixed ideas about that. So this is a standing desk. So if I wasn't worried about something getting unplugged, I can press the button, move it up and stand and move around. I am more comfortable when I'm seated. And I think that is kind of the key thing. However you're most comfortable, do it. However, when you're presenting, one of my top tips for that is to pretend that you're acting through a little bit of a stained glass window. Like people can't see you properly. I can actually demo that. So if I refocus my camera, pretend you're like this, right? So people can't properly see you. So if I just sit here and speak normally, I'm not interesting, I'm not engaging. If I come to life and I move and you see a lot more stuff happen. Now, when it's also in focus, it means that if I'm actually fully engaged, like open your eyes a little bit more than you normally would, move, speak with your arms, be engaged, it makes for a lot more like engaging connection with your audience. The other really important thing is right now I have these two enormous monitors in front of me, but Kristine is actually in a pretty small window right at the top of the screen. That is because my camera is right above my screen. Now, if I had moved Christina over on this monitor, I can see Christina and I can have a really good conversation, but this is not how you engage, right? I feel completely disconnected from you guys right now. So try and speak as closely as into your camera as possible to make that connection happen and to really feel like you're speaking directly to the audience. this is the beautiful thing about doing video, much like podcasting, right? If you're podcasting, you're not talking to a huge audience. You're only talking to your one listener who's listening right now. Same thing with a presentation like this. I'm not talking to a room full of people right now. I'm talking just to Kristine. I'm letting her know everything that I want to know. And in a way, as a audience member right now, you become a voyeur of sorts of an intimate conversation that happens between two people. And because we have a connection, because we have a conversation going, that is much more engaging than me just sitting here staring at the screen. Right? So it's kind of, you have to think a little bit like an actor. I do have the benefit of having some TV presenting training. So it's all of those things that I kind of bake into how I perform. But it's much of the same things that you would do in a one-to-one conversation. The other important thing to keep in mind is that it's not at all like being on stage. When you're on stage, your audience is really far away and you have to think like a stage actor. You have to move big. If you do get makeup, the makeup looks really clownish. Now, this is more like TV rather than stage. So think like a TV presenter. Think like you're in a small, intimate setting, and people can see your face very clearly. So you don't have to go full on Shakespearean actor.
But it's still important to use the body language and to move a bit around and to...
Yeah, I think so. And if you do that better standing up, then stand up by all means. I think it's just kind of like, how do you feel more comfortable engaging? Of course, the other really hard thing is, so right now it's a conversation between me and Kristine, so I have something to focus on. If I'm doing a solo talk, she's not even here. So the only thing I see is my own face, which, I mean, I don't hate my face, but it's not a very interesting thing to talk to, right? And so it's very hard to actually fully kind of engage. So when I'm actually presenting when it's on my own, I usually actually minimize the window. I make sure I'm set up properly, and then I don't like looking at myself when I'm talking, because then it's suddenly like I'm looking in a mirror and I'm tempted to fix my hair and stuff. Instead, you end up like, if you like put up a slide or put up a picture of an audience or do something so you can feel like you're like presenting to a group of people that you need to convey something to. It's kind of hard to do that to a mirror because you know what you know because you're literally yourself.
But would you recommend people to use slides while presenting online, or is it better to just try to talk to the audience without having the slides?
In general, I don't like slides because it kind of hampers the freedom of how you speak. If your next slide is about this, but something you just thought of something and it would fit much better in the narrative to talk about something else, you've kind of ruined your own narrative a little bit. So slides, I would only use slides if you specifically need them to show graphs, because you can't really mime a graph, or you need to show photos of something. But then when you're done with those, I would click away from the slides again and go back to being the talking face, because I think ultimately humans have evolved over millions of years to be able to read body language and to see what's happening in somebody's face. And I think that is actually much more powerful and much more useful than staring at a picture of a graph for 45 minutes.
Yeah. I also know that some of the organizers this year, they're having debates. And when we talked on the phone a few weeks ago, you said that you had a few tricks to share on how to interrupt the people talking without being rude, for example.
Yeah.
Do you want to share that with the audience as well?
Yeah, I think so. There's a really interesting thing about debates and moderated panels and stuff like that, which of course are a mainstay of events and conferences. I think panels can be really interesting, especially if you have a good lineup, because you can learn a lot about what the different, what are the different voices in the room? What are the different opinions? How can different people, whether it's like 3 product managers from 3 different companies or 3 different roles, how do different people solve different problems? So that's a really powerful tool. But as the moderator, it's really important to try and moderate. It's your job. Do it. And I think part of that is just kind of keeping mental track of how much each person has been speaking. And, because some people often will sit there and have really good insights, but they're comfortable enough in their skin that I don't feel the need to hear their own voice. And so actually on the one hand, it's great that your panel is going well and two people are, fighting it out. But if the third person is sitting at the end, they may have the nugget, they may have the insight that the audience really needs to hear, or that can completely change the dynamic of the conversation, but they may just not feel the need to butt in and get involved. And so when two people are really going at each other, a really good phrase to use, which therapists use a lot and moderators use a lot, is I am curious if, so if two people are going at each other, you could actually just say, hey, so I'm pretty curious if Linda has something to say, or I'm curious what Benny thinks about that, or hey, that's really fascinating. You guys have some really strong opinions about that. Who would you agree with more, Belinda? So you can actually tease out the people who are doing that, or tease out some more information out of people. Or, if everybody on the panel is agreeing, which happens surprisingly often, as the moderator, it's kind of okay to just start disagreeing with people and just say, well, what if COVID continues for another 5 years? Talk to me how your business changes then. You don't even have to have a real scenario, but you can come up with something that kind of throws a spanner in the works and makes people think differently about the context for what they're doing. Even if they agree in the current context, something could massively change, right? What if Trump wins another election? What if global heating suddenly makes the oceans rise? How does that affect your business? And you can have some really outlandish scenarios that really, it's just a scenario, right? It's not your opinion. You're not offending anyone, but you can throw something into the mix that changes the context and that makes the conversation a lot more interesting. I've sat in so many of these things where everybody just goes, yes, I agree with you. Yes, I was going to say that. Yes, I completely agree. And, it's lovely that everybody agrees, but it's boring as hell to sit in the audience and just listen to 4 people agree with each other.
Should one prepare for that in advance? So should one have a few sentences that I can just throw in there when you're moderating?
So I think that's a really good question. I think if you are new to moderating, it's a good idea to think about some of those things. I think if you're an experienced moderator, you're kind of always, as a journalist, I always have these kind of contrarian ideas spinning around in my head that I could pick up at any given time. Because as an interviewer, and especially as a television interviewer, dead air, i.e. nobody talking, is the worst thing that could possibly happen. So I'm always ready. So if the conversation suddenly stops, I'll leap in with a question. And it doesn't really matter what it is. It's just, you can't have 4 people on stage going, yep. So yeah, it's but there's nothing wrong with having some note cards and just and just having them in your hand. I suggest don't put your notes on your phone, even if you write them on your phone, because there's nothing as disheartening as having somebody in the middle of a staring at their phone. It looks like they're on Twitter or something. That's just a little bit disrespectful. But paper cards, or I use postcards. I have some really beautiful space postcards that I just write on, and then, or the logo of your company or whatever. That makes a huge difference, and it makes for a much more engaging experience.
Exactly. But I've also been to a few debates where it's really obvious that some of the people in the debate, in the panel, they just do not want to stop talking. You give them the word and they just continue for so long. Do you have any other tips? How can you interrupt them and say interesting, but...
Right, exactly. And the thing is, you don't necessarily have to interrupt them. The trick is to not stop somebody speaking. The trick is to get somebody else to speak. Okay. Because you don't want silence. And I think that's actually an interesting thing especially for a novice moderator, because when somebody is speaking, your job is done. The audience is getting what they're there for. But I think the kind of next level up, the kind of slightly more professional moderator job, is to be able to, hand the torch over and say, that's a really good point, Kristine. So Tom, what do you think about that? Or actually, I had a question for you, Tom. When you talked earlier about yada, 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 right? It's possible to slightly change the topic, so the person who's been ranting doesn't necessarily jump in again. So kind of just leading the conversation in a different direction. And I think it is okay to say, hey, yeah, we've heard a lot from you right now. I wonder what that person says, or you've been a little bit quiet. Do you have anything to say about this? And sometimes they're just daydreaming and they go, nope, I'm good. Like, damn it, we're back to the original person. But usually people are, this is where it's good. People are nervous enough when they're on stage that they're usually on edge and present and like focused, and are able to wrap something up. Remember that a lot of people though are on stage for a mission, right? They're not there to talk about the thing. They're there to talk about their company or their charity or whatever. I'm surprised I haven't mentioned Kamps 65 times already, trying to be very nice and careful. But yeah, so I mean, front of my mind is always the platform we're using and my company. So, you know, a lot of people on panels will try and weave that into the conversation as often as they possibly can, partially because that's their job, that's what they're selling, that's what they're doing, but partially it makes sense. That's what they're spending 90% of their time on. Of course, that's front of mind. So I think inviting your panelists to, you know, yes, talk about what you want to talk about, but also think about what the broader implication is for your audience. That makes for much more interesting conversations, I think.
What about workshops though? If you're having online workshops, how can you engage? How can you give them tasks, and how can you follow up on each session? Do you have any tips?
You actually did a really good example of that at the beginning of this. Like, hey, please put questions in the chat, please, whatever, right? And I think it's about interactivity. You know, if the workshop isn't interactive, it may as well just be a YouTube video. And there are probably already YouTube videos about what you're talking about, right? So if you're not doing a better job than them, then I would much rather watch it on YouTube. Then I can watch it at twice the speed. I can skip the boring bits. I can just watch the bits I want, or can read an article or whatever. So the question is, okay, how can you use the medium you're at, use the platform you're on, use the medium you're in to engage and really make goodness happen. So lots of little breakouts on. Now I'm actually going to talk about Kamp. On Kamp, we have the concept of rooms. You can do breakout rooms to say, okay, everybody go to the breakout room that you want to discuss and come back in 10 minutes. And, you know, people can break away and do that, come back. And having bunches of like integration and breakout sessions and interactive pieces of it makes for a much more engaging experience. And it means that people stay tuned in because they really feel like they get a lot more out of investing their time in this session.
We've also been doing that for a few workshops that we had, and some of them it's been okay to do those breakout sessions in different rooms, while other times it's kind of hard to just get 10 minutes and to get a task or work on something together with 10 others. And it's only time for like pumping in one question, and then the session is out and you're presenting everything. So you're just sitting there for 10 minutes and you didn't really get anything out of it.
Yep.
So
I think the challenge there is making. So my main context for this is photography. As I mentioned, I've written a bunch of photography books. I've run hundreds of workshops. I've trained probably tens of thousands of people how to do photography at this point. And you know, you'll always have differing skill levels, different understanding levels, different that kind of stuff, which means that if you get a complete novice and a complete expert in the room, even if the question makes sense, they probably can't make sense of it together because they come at it from a really different way. So if you can get the breakout, like the question for the breakout to be general enough that there's kind of ideally multi-layered questions, right? I would not send people off with more than one or two questions, but hopefully you get something where they go away and they can answer one of the questions really easily. Maybe it's a yes or no question. So would you do breakout session? Yes or no? Second question, why? Or what is the benefit, right? So you get to a quick agreement, hopefully, for a quick yes or no or a number or something that is easy to land on. We get a little bit of interesting conversation going, and then you dig into the why. So hopefully the first thing takes 2 minutes, and then however much time you have left, you can dig into the why of the question. And that's really where the meat is, and that's where it's actually valuable to hear other people's opinion. Because if you just sit in a room and go, who says yes, who says no, you may as well just do a raised hands thing, you know, and that's as quick, and you don't have to faff with breakout rooms and stuff.
But should you have moderators in each breakout room then, or?
I typically recommend that, yes. But if you don't have enough people for that, then it's possible to pop in and out of each room, or, there are lots of different ways of doing it, depending on how many staff members you have available, how many attendees you have. Sometimes I recommend that people have different types of breakout rooms. So you say, maybe by state, maybe by country, maybe by experience level, maybe by, we're talking to a company now that wants to do a bunch of events for real estate. And they do the main session that is for everybody, but then they have breakout rooms per region, because it makes a lot more sense, because the laws are different, the context is different, everything is different for that specific region. So that way people get a lot out of seeing the big picture, and then they can focus in and talk about the specifics. And that makes for a really good dynamic for combining the kind of 60,000 foot view and kind of the macroscopic view of the scene they're trying to figure out.
Yeah. And I think the last thing that we have to talk about is how to run a good Q&A session. That can also be quite challenging.
Yeah, I think there's two things, right? One part of it is encouraging people to ask questions. So, hey, please ask your questions in the chat. The other piece is, how do you choose which questions that you actually want to get answered, right? If you get like 3 questions from the audience, then those are the 3 questions. But a lot of the time you'll get hundreds. And so the most interesting questions, if it's too generic, then it's not really that interesting. If it's super specific and it isn't relevant to everybody, it's not that interesting either. So I think kind of the Goldilocks level of question is where it's specific enough that the person you're asking the question to has to come up with a new answer. They can't just regurgitate an answer they've given before, but broad enough that it is actually interesting to a lot of the audience. So it is finding the sweet spot in between. If I were moderating a Q&A session, so if I was in your chair, I would come up with 10 questions before the Q&A even starts. So you can prime the pumps, you can ask some good questions, and that you feel, okay, these are interesting questions. I want to hear, in this case, me talk about this. But also you want to kind of have the opportunity of kind of setting the tone. Like, these are the kind of questions we would like to get from you. Like, if you have something in this kind of general area, then that is great. Because if somebody asks, like, okay, what do you do with the specific lighting in southern Mongolia? I'm like, it's not interesting to anybody in this room. I can answer the question because it's beautiful, it's golden, you need to use different filters on your camera, etc., etc. But it's not relevant to most people, and so it doesn't make for a very good Q&A session.
But should one then send all the questions that you have prepared for the person guesting the event in advance, so they know what kind of questions they will be asked and what they should prepare for?
So some presenters insist on that. I don't really like that. I think it is much more interesting to see how somebody lands at an answer. If you ask me a question that I don't know the answer to, I might just say that. I was like, I don't know, but you know what? The way I would approach that would be, I think about this, I think about that. And so seeing the thought process is actually as interesting as, seeing the thought process is actually as interesting as hearing the answer. And so surprise questions, I think, are really helpful. Not least if there are questions coming from the audience, they will also be surprise questions anyway,
Yeah.
And hopefully the person who's speaking is enough of an expert to be able to answer anything, or just be honest and say, I haven't got a clue. Next question.
And that's okay too, right?
Absolutely. Saying I don't know is a rare superpower, because you don't know everything. Even if you're an expert, in fact, especially if you're an expert, you start to get the knowledge about what the edges of your knowledge are. And saying I don't know, or I know how to find out, but it's going to take me a while, is a perfectly fine.
Let me Google that for you. 2 seconds.
Exactly.
We only have 5 minutes left, so I think we should start to sum up this session. We talked about audio and video equipment. You said that it's more important to have a good quality on your audio if you have to choose between the two. Correct? We also talked a bit about how to moderate a debate and also to have workshops. And we landed on how should one interrupt someone in a debate? You should
sit here in silence and do nothing.
Really hard to communicate that.
It is pretty tricky to get that. But I think, I was curious about something actually is a really good way of diving in and kind of inserting yourself into the conversation.
Yeah. And what if, because now, especially with Oslo Innovation Week, everything is done in English. Yep. If you're a bit insecure about speaking in a different language, is that a problem? Should you just jump in there and do your best, or?
I think it kind of goes to what I said earlier. It's about communicating. It's not about perfection. I mean, English is by now my best language, but it's also my third language. I'm Dutch, grew up in Norway, and then eventually learned English. But I also think there's something about, if somebody doesn't speak perfect English, they're still making an effort to speak in the language that most people are able to understand. It becomes kind of the common ground. And I think, if you are nervous about the language, then think about, okay, if I spoke my main language, nobody would understand, or only a part of the people would understand. And people are probably willing to forgive imperfections in my language in order to get the content that I'm sharing. And if they're not, then whatever. They don't sound like nice people.
That makes me happy.
I mean, you're going to have to be a little bit brave, I think.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you so much for joining us for this session and to share your knowledge and everything. It's been really valuable for me at least, and hopefully for the audience as well.
Absolutely. It was wonderful to be here.
Thank you. And several key takeaways that I will bring along in the future to at least share with my community and my network. And hopefully we can also learn from this and get a better or more successful online events in the future.
Awesome. I love it.
And I also have to remind all of you partners to please sign up and register on Kamps. The events are now live. So through Kamps, you can follow all of our studio sessions and you can just create your profile and watch the events and talk to each other. So thank you so much. And I'll see all of you in a few weeks. And Haje, thank you.
I look forward to hosting you all in a few weeks.
Yay. Okay. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Cheers, folks.